Oh, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at some practice with aggregate demand. So in the playlist, I actually put this video that's a good review from Jacob Clifford about aggregate demand, and I encourage you to check it out if you feel a little shaky after my lecture. For each of these little prompts, and there's 18 of them, normally we would do them in class and we'd split them up and things, you're going to identify did C, I, G, or XN change, or did none of those change, right? So you're kind of looking for, some of them are going to be red herrings where it's not going to change any of the things. If it changes CIGXN, it's going to affect aggregate demand. And so we'd say, would it be aggregate demand going up or aggregate demand be decreasing? And is that a left or a right? And again, that's just kind of a practice of like, left, right, and that kind of thing. So we'll go ahead and get started. So a significant boom in the stock market, right? Remember that of all the shifters thinking about consumers' wealth, when their perceptions of wealth even is affected, they'll often go out and purchase more stuff or purchase less stuff in response to that. So this is consumption spending, and we would say up and to the right. The second one, increase in Social Security payments. Now, a lot of students often think that that's government spending, but it's not. Remember, grandma gets that transfer from the government, and that doesn't count into GDP until grandma buys cat food with it. So we would say that this is C, and because they're increasing the payments to grandma, aggregate demand is going to go up and to the right. Consumers fear a recession's coming. So in that case, that should key you in. It's consumers and their expectations about the economy. Now, we know that it's consumers, but if you fear a recession's coming, you're going to start squirreling away those acorns today, right? You want to save a little bit more today. And so it would reduce your consumption and decrease aggregate demand, moving it to the left. Increased income of a global trade partner. And so this would be if the EU is getting really wealthy and it's doing really well and prosperous, they're going to buy more goods and services from all countries, including the United States, right? In any trade partner, you kind of think about they're buying something, and so now they're going to buy more of it. So we would say this is an XN, and it's going to increase our exports to that trade partner. So we would say it's an increase in aggregate demand to the right. Congress cuts personal income taxes. Again, this is tempting for some students to say it's government spending, but it's not. They're not spending anything. They're just cutting the tax rates on consumers, personal, meaning consumers and households versus corporate. So this is going to affect consumption spending, and it's going to increase it, moving it to the right. Investment spending decrease. Hopefully that's kind of an easy one. That's an I, a decrease, and to the left. Make that a little clearer. I decrease to the left. Consumers expect a strong job market soon, right? That's the reverse really of number 3. So consumption, and it's gonna increase consumption and move it to the right, because if you think, hey, there's gonna be a great job market very soon, it's gonna be a bonanza of money, then you're gonna spend a little more today. You'll feel more comfortable doing that. Congress cuts defense spending. So this is the first time, right, we've seen where they're actually changing the government spending on stuff. Maybe they're not buying as many battleships. Well, they don't have any battleships. Maybe they're not buying as many aircraft carriers, right? So G, decrease to the left. Government decreases pension payments. Now, this one's tricky as well. You might think, well, that's government spending. No, remember, transfers don't count. So this is really just an example of Social Security payments, but it's the opposite, right? They're decreasing them. So this will cut consumption. You can't see my C there. Decrease to the left. Lower inflation means lenders decrease nominal interest rates. Now, remember, when I taught you about aggregate demand, I said there's a downward slope to aggregate demand, and there's some reasons for that. And among those, right, is that idea that the interest rates are sensitive to changes in inflation, to price levels. But we shouldn't think that that's going to shift aggregate demand. Like if lenders changed interest rates and it was totally unrelated to price levels, then it affects aggregate demand. But if we start with inflation, that should be a little key in here. If we start with price levels or inflation happening, that's going to be something where we go, okay, it's not going to affect aggregate demand directly. It's just going to cause a movement along the curve. So this is no change, and we'll just kind of carry that through. Central bank increases the money supply, which decreases real interest rates. Now that is an example where the price levels didn't cause the interest rate to change. Something else did. So the interest rates changed, and the interest rates went down, which means that it's cheaper now to borrow. So you could say consumption spending changed or investment spending changed, either one, or I, but either way, it's going to increase it because they're going to borrow more, right? Interest rates are lower, so it increases borrowing, and so it increases spending, moving us to the right. The dollar increases in price compared to the euro, making U.S. goods cheaper, right? So this one actually, I'm reading this, I'm thinking U.S. dollar increases in price relative compared, making U.S. goods cheaper. So if the goods are cheaper, then that's going to affect net exports. But actually, for this one, I think that I've actually made a mistake here. This should say decreases in price, because the dollar decreasing in price would actually cause U.S. goods to be cheaper. So I made a mistake there, actually. But this will affect in net exports, and it would increase them because US goods are now cheaper, and so it shifts it to the right. So my apologies on that one. Businesses reduce purchases of new manufacturing equipment. So that is the idea of investment in spending, right? That's buying new equipment, and they're cutting back, so it's a decrease to the left. Higher domestic price levels. All right, that right there, that keys us in. We started with inflation, right? If we start with a prompt about inflation, then that's going to affect, right, the along the curve, right? If anything starts with price levels or inflation in that way, it's almost always just going to move us along the curve. Because remember, aggregate demand is the relationship of price levels and quantity of purchases going on. And so if we change price, right, price doesn't shift the curve. So price levels don't shift the curve. And so this one is no change and moving over. Businesses report larger inventories at the end of the year compared to the beginning of the year. So this one is one that's a little, remember, hey, inventory changes, that's investment spending. Inventories investment, inventories investment, inventories investment, inventories investment, inventories investment. Don't forget that one, okay? And if they have larger inventories, then that's increasing the investment and it's moving it to the right. And we can talk more in class if you have questions about why we count that, but inventories are part of investment, change in inventories. Rising price levels, boom, right there, price levels right there. Be careful, right? No change. I didn't even read the rest. Decrease consumers' wealth. Well, that's the explanation of what we call the wealth effect. It's one of the three reasons, along with the net exports effect and along with the interest rate effect, for why aggregate demand is downward sloping, but it doesn't shift the curve, right? Price levels don't shift the curve. Home buyers express strong preferences for newly constructed houses. Now, this one's tricky. I put this one in intentionally because it's tricky. New construction is always investment spending, right? New construction is always investment, new construction investment, new construction investment, new construction investment, new construction investment. Okay, hopefully you can remember it. And so then that's going to increase it to the right. Americans express preferences for new international automobiles. Now we're tricky. Now we're really tricky. If they're foreign made, that's going to be net exports, and it's going to reduce our net exports because we're buying more foreign made cars. That's an import, and so it's going to pull our net exports down because we're not, we subtract imports, remember? So that's a decrease to the left. All right, so I gave you some really tricky ones in here. Hopefully this helped you. If you need a little more practice, check out that YouTube video from Jacob Clifford. I'll see you next time.